Welcome to the Probate Nation. I am Richard Ruddy. You know, everyone has heard of the famous Mona Lisa painting by Leonardo da Vinci. Yet back in 1911, it was not so well known. That changed one August afternoon when a disgruntled former Louvre employee, a fellow by the name of Vincenzo Peruggia, entered the Louvre, removed the painting, wrapped it in a smock, and walked out the front door. He later attempted to sell the Mona Lisa and was arrested, but the painting was heralded among the Italian public before being returned to the Louvre in 1913. And the notoriety from the theft dramatically increased the painting's status as it now stands as one of the most famous works of art in the world. Unlike most crimes, art theft has a relatively low rate of case solving and recovery. So if your estate includes the gifting of precious art to your loved ones or your favorite charity, or if you are probating an estate with said art, you will find our show tonight of special interest. How to value that art, how to protect it from theft, how to sell it so if that should be your wish, are some of the questions that come to mind. And we're delighted to have as our guest an experienced attorney who often deals with these issues in the course of his law practice. He will share his insights along with a host of other suggestions he encourages you to keep in mind when dealing with art collections. So let's get going, and let me tell you a little bit about our guest. He graduated from the University of North Carolina School of Law in 1987 and began his career litigating business, estate, and other white-collar crime matters in Atlanta. Today, he is a principal with the Kerman Law Firm in their North Carolina office. He concentrates his practice on corporate and partnership tax, business transactions, and intellectual property issues. And he is a frequent presenter of continuing education seminars to attorneys, accountants, and financial advisors regarding business, tax, estate, and asset protection planning. Please welcome attorney Scott Tippett. Hey, Scott, before we jump into the program, I want to just tell you how interesting it was to hear from you as we prepare for this program, all about the different types of art that might be in an estate, either going through probate or subject to estate tax. You have seen some amazing things during the course of your career, I understand.
I have. I mean, art is really in the eye of the beholder, and it sort of depends. One person's art's another man's junk, but art covers pretty much the waterfront. I've seen everything from prototype cars, abstract art, sort of the classics. I've got one estate right now that concerns a boatload of baseball memorabilia, which is loosely defined as art. And so there's just no telling what an estate's going to turn up.
That's very interesting. Let's jump into that, because one of the first things that came to mind was to talk about what are some of the common art in our collections that you see estates having to deal with on a fairly regular basis.
Well, some of the most common ones are, what we would consider to be traditional forms of art: paintings, drawings, sculptures. Often it's by not by one of the great masters, but by someone that's achieved a fair degree of notoriety, either regionally or nationally. And the first question that we always have is, how do we value it? A lot of times people will come across, I had an estate once that involved a 1964 Gibson electric guitar, which was sort of unique, and it was very rare in and of itself. I wouldn't really consider that artwork, but it sort of falls in the same category. Sometimes you'll have an estate that has old manuscripts that will be loosely, artwork. The ones you see probably most often, though, is artwork by regional or national artists. Every once in a while you'll get something that's truly spectacular, and Andy Warhol, Jackson Pollock, something like that. But those are few and far between.
And what are some of the common issues that art collections present for somebody who's trying to dispose of those or otherwise trying to probate those? What are some of the common issues that come up?
Well, one of the very first issues is the issue of title. Did the decedent, or does the person that owns it now, have good title? So that's the very first issue. Without title, you really can't do anything. A second issue that always comes up is valuation. How do we value it for estate tax purposes, for income tax purposes? How do we insure it? Because typically artwork is not going to be insured under a typical homeowner's policy. Many people think that it is, but typically those policies have riders that vastly restrict the dollar value of any claim. And then the final issue is if we're going to dispose of the artwork, at a sale, how do estate and use taxes figure into it?
Well, I think you really hit on and this is one of the next things in my thought process as we were sort of assembling the thought of how we would present this, but is how does somebody go about authenticating art to make sure that it's general? How do they determine that?
Well, there again, it depends on the nature of the art and the artist. If we're talking about artwork for a living artist, that's fairly easy because typically every living artist, particularly ones of any notoriety, are going to have a gallery that sort of specializes in their work. And you can take the work to the gallery and say, is this legitimate? Do you have a record of sales? So you sort of start constructing it that way. If the artist is passed, it's a bit more difficult. Again, there may be galleries that specialize in that artist's work, and so it's a matter of seeking out the galleries. If you can't do that, then we need to start doing something broader, an internet search. You can call any reputable auction house, Christie's, Sotheby's. They tend to have people either on staff or know people that specialize in a variety of artists' work just for this reason. Last but not least is the Art Loss Register, which is a great source of stolen art. And again, the Art Loss Register is not going to tell you; it will tell you that whether the work is stolen or not, or at least if it's in their database. And if it's in their database as a stolen work of art, you've got a real problem on your hands. That's not to say that a decedent acquired it inappropriately. It may have been sold to them by someone else, so you don't know. But those are all sources of information to check to make sure that the artwork that you do possess, you actually do have good and valid title to it.
Well, it's interesting because that sort of segues into the thought and the question about how do I establish my title to the art? Okay, so you mentioned, and I was very fascinated by, well, of course, we're looking for, do I have a receipt? Do I have a contract? And all those different types of things that would sort of demonstrate that I bought it, or maybe I inherited from an estate from my grandfather, and so I have something in the probate records that might track that, I guess. But
right. And searching, trying to establish title for artwork is sort of similar to establishing real estate title. It involves a matter of a paper chase, following the records, starting with who we know has it now, figuring out where they got it from,
mm-hmm.
Are there any documents that establish that, then figuring out where that person got it from, and so on, going back to the original artist if it's possible, or at least back to where we know we had clearly good title to something. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard.
Well, and I think this leads to some of the things we talked about, but apparently if I bought property from someone who stole it, then that person can't convey good title to me. Isn't that the case we talked about?
Theft does not convey title. And there are a number of very famous art theft cases where that was the issue. And what ended up happening is once the theft came to light, basically the rightful owner was able to retrieve it back from the person that possessed it. And in one case, it was pulled from a pending auction and repatriated. So again, theft does not convey title. So it's ever so important to make sure that not only the person that you're dealing with has good title, but to sort of check the chain of title going back to make sure they can establish their bona fides on title as well.
Now, you mentioned this art registry. Okay, mm-hmm. So I had never heard about that. Of course, I don't really deal with a lot of the states that have art. But tell us a little bit about the purpose behind it and how that helps us to kind of pin down my ownership and right to the art.
Sure, happy to. The Art Loss Register was established in London in 1990, and it was sort of an outgrowth of another nonprofit organization that started in New York in the mid-'70s, the International Foundation for Art Research. And what the Art Loss Register does is it catalogs works of stolen art. It also now lets you establish what's called positive registration, which means you can register your work and they know that you're the owner. And so once you have sort of gone through that process and established that you're the rightful owner, you now have a document that says that you're the owner. They offer sort of three main areas of services. They will do a search of their database, and it's probably the largest stolen art database in the world. All the major auction houses use it. And it's, again, one of those things that just as a matter of due diligence, if you acquire a work of art or thinking about acquiring a work of art, or getting ready to dispose of one, you don't quite know where the person, the estate got it, you need to run it through the art loss register. It registers works of art. You report theft or loss. So again, the idea is that people are going to report their thefts, and the art loss register will make, will add it to their database, and then they help people recover lost works of art. Once you understand sort of how it was formed and founded, it sort of makes sense. The art loss register, all the major shareholders are big insurance companies, and major businesses from the insurance industry and the art industry coming together because they all realized, in the fairly distant past, 1990, that there needed to be sort of a central clearinghouse where someone could say, is this work stolen? Do I have good title?
Well, you mentioned and I know we didn't get into it to start the program because I wanted to save that for now. But you mentioned about a case where someone had stolen several paintings and then they gave it to their lawyer, and then certain things unfolded, and so I thought it was very interesting. Why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about that, because I think it kind of ties this all together.
Sure. Well, that was the case involving Paul Cézanne's Bouillard et Fruits, which is probably the largest art theft case ever in Massachusetts, at least. In that case, sort of a petty criminal broke in one summer and stole 7 works of art, one of which was the Cézanne. And then the criminal gave the artwork to his lawyer to keep for safekeeping, thinking that his lawyer, under the attorney-client privilege, could not reveal who his client was, what the source of it was, the whole 9 yards. Well, the petty criminal got killed the next summer, but the lawyer hung on to the art, didn't know what to do with it, at least not initially. Eventually, the lawyer figured out that he could move it from his office somewhere in Massachusetts over to Switzerland, put it in a Swiss vault, given the Swiss bank secrecy laws at the time, which not the case anymore, but back then they were very strict. A few more years go by, and the lawyer decides he wants to try to liquidate the piece of art. So he sets up a Panamanian shell company because he doesn't want it tied to him. So he sets up a Panamanian shell company to take possession of the artwork and to act as the prospective seller. The Panamanian shell company reaches out to the known true owner, and they broker a deal. And the deal was sort of this: I'll give you back 6 pieces of art if you let me retain the Cézanne. At that point, I think probably the Cézanne was worth, I don't know, between 12 and 20 million, maybe, somewhere in there, just that one work of art. And so the people sort of realized that something was better than nothing, signed off on the deal and said, okay, fine. We will give up title to this and you give us the other 6 pieces back. So the lawyer, thinking everything was hunky-dory, says, great, signs the deal. And then the next year puts the work up for auction. I can't remember if it was Christie's or Sotheby's, but put the work up for auction in London. At that point, the people reneged on the deal, got Interpol involved, and they impounded the artwork. Long story short, the artwork got returned to the rightful owner. The agreement was voided. And then most recently, I think I checked this right before the show, the last auction of that particular piece of artwork occurred in May of 2019. And at that time, the Bouillard et Fruits auction fetched a price of just north of $59 million.
Oh my goodness gracious!
It's definitely appreciated, and so that's certainly why folks wanted to hang on to it. But that is a case of where registering to the art loss register. I think in this case, the art loss register was actually involved in brokering the initial deal and clarifying title on it. So that was very helpful there. And that case still goes down as the largest case in Massachusetts, at least, of art theft.
Well, I guess the lesson learned then from that whole discussion as we kind of close up this particular section of the show is that, once you've got your art and you ought to register it with the art registry. So, and I guess when you do that, you provide some bona fides to show how you got your title, so they have a title search record there. And then that helps protect you to some extent. But there's other things we can do. So, how would let's just talk about value though, because the values just seem to go skyrocket these days on this art. So tell me, how would somebody as an executor go about establishing the value of the art under their control?
Well, again, the first and easiest thing is to hopefully find a gallery that specializes in that artist's work, particularly if it's a more contemporary artist, which is normally not an issue if they're of any notoriety. If it's an older work or a less well-known work, then the executor or conservator needs to employ an art advisor. An art advisor is someone that is skilled in the art appraisal business and can help not only establish title, but also establish an appropriate value for the work.
Well, that's good to know. Now, how does so I mean, obviously a lot of the value issues have to do with taxes and gains if you sell and charitable contributions and all those different types of things. So how does the IRS value art for estate and gift tax purposes?
Well, the IRS, again, for estate and gift tax purposes, the art's going to be valued as of the fair market value as of the date of death. So we have to establish the fair market value. Typically, the IRS has had for a number of years an art appraisal panel, and if the work is in excess of $50,000, it has to go in front of the panel. Back when things were more active, like back in 2015, 2016, the panel was doing about 420 cases a year. In those, it sustained the value of the taxpayer in about 65% of the cases and recommended an increase in value in about 35% of the cases. Now, the panel is not just people that work at the IRS. It's actually a panel composed of sort of national experts in the area. So these are art curators, art advisors that really know their stuff and can dig down into the nitty gritty and help establish a value. More recently, I think the most recent data available is for 2021. And while the number of overall cases was down substantially, I think it was only in between 1 and 200. Curiously enough, the ratio of cases in which the art panel upheld the taxpayer's value, it never varied from 2015. In 2015, they had 425 cases. About 2/3 they upheld the taxpayer value. In 2021, they had about 140 cases. And again, they upheld the value in about 2/3 of the cases.
Okay. And there are some publications out there that the IRS has that I think will help people.
Right. There are a couple of them, actually. There's publication 561, which discusses the terminal value of donated property. Publication 5497, the photographic requirements for art and antiquities. And then there's a whole revenue procedure that discusses the art appraisal panel.
Okay. Now, I'm going to jump ahead here. So obviously, valuation is important for estate and gift tax purposes. We need to have that value, figure out what my gift is or how much my estate's going to be impacted. And I know you just shared some stuff. How do I have this art though now. I'm past value. How do I go about protecting the art collection? Are there any recommendations that you have that can protect it from, from fire or damage?
Sure. I mean, you would want an art title insurance policy. There is a standard policy out there that governs artwork, and you would definitely want a policy and make sure that's actually insured. As an executor or conservator, that should be one of the first things you do, because
Sure.
if it could be insured for a loss occurs and it's not insured, you're going to be personally liable, most likely for breach of fiduciary duty for not protecting an asset. But there's an heiress policy, which is sort of the standard and the velvet, well, the golden standard of art policies. And it's much like a title insurance policy for real estate. They're experts. If you don't have an appraisal, will go through and help you appraise it. They will establish the provenance, where did it come from, to make sure that everybody has owned it legally ever since. Mm-hmm. And then they'll issue a policy. The great thing about that policy is, like real estate title policies in most states, the beneficiaries can take advantage of it and carry on the coverage, and it can be assigned for a nominal value to a new purchaser.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I think that's a very, very important thing to keep in mind. And so you obviously recommend that. And certainly if you're a fiduciary, I would say out of the gate, you want to make sure you get yourself protected, because you don't want to be personally liable. Okay, I have this art collection. I'm an executor. How do I go about selling this art?
Again, I would reach out, try to find galleries that deal in the artist's work, because they're going to have a list of people that like that particular artist, and they can give them a heads up that, hey, we've got these new pieces. Mm-hmm. If the pieces are worth substantially more, then I would contact one of the major auction houses. I was working with an estate not too long ago where a regional artist, my client's husband, who had since passed, was able to became good friends with an artist before he was really well known, had a number of original works. And these were, watercolors, drawings. Um, and when we went to have these appraised, I think it was Sotheby's that actually did the auction individually. These works, and there were, I don't know, 20 or 30 of them at least, were selling for between 500 to 750,000, and they're just small artworks, not much bigger than a legal size sheet of paper.
Wow. Wow.
And there, the initial issue was trying to convince the corporate trustee that they needed to do something other than just let their, who they knew locally take a look at it, because we knew that they had a lot of value. And finally, they realized that and got the right people involved.
That's fantastic. Now, when I take these to someone to sell, what kind of fees am I looking at as far as a charge? Because obviously there's a lot of work to be done in order to get these things sold.
Probably a typical auction fee is going to run around 15%. And there's typically a buyer's fee as well. Sometimes that's going to run, I don't know, 2 to 5%, but that's, the buyer's fee is paid by the buyer. But on the seller side, probably about 15%.
Okay. Okay. Now, we've talked about a lot of different things. What are some of the more common mistakes that you see people make as executors when they're dealing with art that's in an estate or in a trust?
One of the most common mistakes is not getting good advice before they sell it, because they need to value it. And a lot of times they're just leaving money on the table. Other cases, the stuff we've already talked about, not having it adequately insured. Sometimes, depending on how they sell it, they're going to pay a lot more tax than they otherwise need to pay. And different jurisdictions do things different ways. For example, in North Carolina, where I practice, art would be considered personal property, which, unless it's in a trust, is going to pass through the probate process in North Carolina, which means the clerk's going to require that you produce an appraisal. It's going to get assessed probate fees. And generally, we don't like to have clerk's offices really meddling and stuff like that if we don't have to. So that would sort of go back to the planning side, which is if you've got artwork, make sure that you put it in at least a revocable trust or whatever your particular state may have that lets you sidestep probate.
Sure. Makes a lot of sense. Well, the other thing we started to talk about, which I think we have time to talk about, is a lot of people are immigrating from overseas, and they have art they're bringing from Europe and Asia and South and Africa. You mentioned that there's some planning that ought to be done there to protect that art and maybe avoid having to get it taxed in a certain way. Could you share a couple of thoughts about that?
Absolutely, happy to. Our income tax system, we tax, if you're subject to the income tax system here in the United States, your income earned anywhere in the world is subject to it. We're one of the few countries that does that. Most countries are source-based, which means that, if I'm a French citizen and my income comes from the United States, I don't have to pay tax on it in France, only the income that I earn in France. But in the United States, if you're subject to the tax system, income is income from any source anywhere in the world. So if you've got a client or you've got a family member that owns a work of art and they are thinking about immigrating here, depending on what the tax structure is in the country where they currently reside, it would be probably to their benefit to go ahead and sell the work if they're considering selling it before they immigrate and are subject to the tax system here. For this reason, art is considered a collectible. And under the Internal Revenue Code, collectibles are taxed at a special capital gains rate. In this case, special does not mean good. It means more than the ordinary. Collectibles are taxed at the special capital gains rate. Only the IRS would think that a higher rate is special, of 28% across the board. Doesn't matter what your income bracket is. Normal capital gains are indexed 0, 15%, 20% based on what your adjusted gross income is. Not for collectibles. It's a flat 28% across the board.
Wow. Wow.
And so if you can sell it, for a less tax burden somewhere else and not be subject to the IRS, great, go ahead and do it before you come here, because once you immigrate here, you're going to be subject to the tax code and they're going to take your 28%.
Well, that is great information to know, because we do have a lot of folks that are moving here. So we have covered a lot of territory, Scott. I want to get your closing comments, some lessons learned, some final tips you want to share with folks as far as how they should deal with art collections and probate?
Well, again, things that we've been talking about. First of all, make sure that you get someone that knows the artist and knows what they're doing. The biggest mistake I see are people that mean well, and I'm talking about executors. You've named your brother, your sister, your Uncle Joe, that just really don't have a clue how to deal with it. So get someone that actually knows the value of the work, insure the work, and then make sure that if you're going to sell the work, that you get the appropriate approval of the court or beneficiaries, as the court may require.
I think that's a good advice, and I think it also really goes to some of the planning that the owner of the art should undertake before they pass away. Gathering the title insurance information, having their own insurance policies and all those things in place really helps the person who's now probating that estate or administering that trust. This helps them, gets them so far further down the road as far as what they've got to do. So that all good advice. Scott, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us about art collections and how we deal with that. Great information. I learned a ton today that I didn't know before, and great information for all of our members of the Probate Nation community. So thank you again for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
You're very welcome. I've probated many estates over the years, and frankly, I would not know valuable art if it hit me upside the head. But what I have learned tonight is that there is precious art. If there is precious art in an estate, a host of fiduciary obligations need to be addressed. What I take away from the show tonight is the importance of getting advice from an attorney familiar with securing, protecting, and disposing of art. Did not know you could get title insurance for your art, and certainly did not know the importance of registering your art with the art registry. But I do now, and I am grateful for the education our guest provided this evening. So all of you do it yourself executors, beware, act prudently, and get legal advice early before your valuable art, like the Mona Lisa, disappears one sunny afternoon. This concludes our show this evening. We hope you found it informative. Just a reminder that replays of the show can be viewed on the Probate Nation website and YouTube channel. And if you want to receive monthly estate administration and probate tips, please sign up for the free Probate Nation newsletter. Until next time, I am Richard Ruddy, and this is the Probate Nation.